Welcome to the New South Wales Council of Social Services Building Resilience for Emergency Responses podcast, where we hear from local, place-based services supporting their community through disasters. Nunjajajam, Riverston Neighbourhood Centre, Muslim Women Australia and the family place Moruya share their stories of leadership, innovation and commitment needed in difficult times.
Hello, I'm Prabha from the New South Wales Council of Social Service. This is the first in a series of interviews that we're going to be doing with our member organisations about their work during this period of disasters our state has been experiencing since 2019. Today I'm speaking with Malindey Sorrel, the CEO of the family place in Moruya on the beautiful South Coast of New South Wales. Hi, Malindey.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
I'd love for you to start by telling us a bit about yourself and the work of the family place.
So we've been servicing the local area, initially in the Eurobodalla, for about 33 years. And over that time, we've expanded to the Bega Valley as well. We're a place-based service provider, so we're very connected to our local community. Most of our funding is through Department of Communities and Justice, and we deliver on a broad range of psychosocial programs under the disaster recovery efforts. And we're also a specialist homelessness service.
Just for our listeners, can you describe a little bit what those services look like?
Sure. So we've always worked with the region's most vulnerable people. We've had to have a very trauma-informed focus. Often it's acute mental health conditions and concerns, drug and alcohol issues. We see a lot of family violence and some really entrenched trauma.
And how many staff do you have? It sounds like really complex problems that you're dealing with.
We have 19 staff. Most of those staff are part-time. Although the work is complex, the funding is not huge.
So you've said that you're operating on a really tight budget to deliver what sounds like a really big suite of services for people who have complex problems. How did the Black Summer, the fires during that time, impact on what you could do for people?
The Black Summers were a huge impact to us at that time, and the lead up to the fires was pretty immense as well, with the drought, which lasted quite a long period of time. There was a real sense of increasing and heightened need, and there was a very long build-up to the actual events of the South Coast being hit with the fire. There was just so many months of very, very thick smoke. And then the actual catastrophic time where the fire front swept through on multiple occasions, it just completely disabled all of the communities along the coast and inland.
How did that impact on the work that you do?
People weren't able to contact the service. We weren't able to contact a lot of our child protection families. We were concerned about people's campsites being burnt who were already sleeping rough. There was complete confusion, complete chaos. Telecommunications weren't up for many, many weeks. People didn't have power for a long time. And there was a real lack of planning for any kind of disaster of that magnitude.
So I imagine, because you have strong relationships with so many of the people that you work with, that your service may have been a first line of contact for those people, that people would have been ringing you rather than perhaps emergency services or other big services that were flown in to deal with the disaster.
Absolutely, yeah. People were wanting to know what's happening, where do we go for support. They were very confused, particularly when the evacuation centres started closing down as well and the recovery points started packing up. There was a real sense of a gap in the community, and even over 2.5 years on, we're still seeing that really big gap.
I understand that there was very little you could do at the height of that crisis. What was the role that you and the rest of the staff at the family place took on as things became more safe and people were able to return?
The role we took on was really around immediate needs and support. And at that stage, there was no resourcing at all for that. So it was a very challenging time to keep delivering on our existing programs. But then we were also becoming a conduit and a community place for other people to access support. So there was immediate needs, food being provided. We were also getting donations through here, blankets, those sorts of immediate needs that were needing to be met. And our financial counselling service particularly took a lot of the brunt as well when insurance claims started coming through that weren't being honoured and people were in severe financial hardship.
It sounds like you became a bit of a hub for people to come to. Were you a first port of call for people?
There was a number of not-for-profits in the area that were experiencing a similar thing because we were known in the community. We weren't trying to encourage that because we didn't have the capacity, but we definitely didn't turn anyone away either. Our main priority was really focusing on our very traumatised families that we were already working with, who were already impacted with mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues, child protection issues, and it was really challenging just to support them through those times.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm also thinking about, the fact that not that long after the fires, the pandemic started. So your community was then dealing with dual emergency.
Yeah, that was an absolute shock for people to be starting to hear about this pandemic in other countries. We were reeling still from what had happened here. It was absolutely catastrophic, the state of devastation and destruction with people's homes. We knew as a service that there was going to be a real need for emotional and mental health and wellbeing supports. With the pandemic coming through, it was a very debilitating time. So people were basically locked down, locked away, and unable to progress that natural cycle of healing after disaster. So that was very, very challenging, knowing that the best practice in disaster recovery is around social cohesion.
Is there anything that you did to counter some of those restrictions during COVID? Was there a way that you could do delivery of programs?
We did a few things. We managed to pull off right before COVID a very large-scale community art gathering, and it was held at a place where people had fled at the Bateman's Bay Surf Lifesaving Club in Malua Bay, so that hit the global media. There was thousands of people there, and I think only weeks or days after that we were in lockdown, so we had to start moving online in a remote service delivery arrangement. During lockdown, we dropped off art supplies and art material to people, and they were able to, through a facilitated sort of webinar, create something. We did group parenting support programs. We even did meditation and mindfulness online with a facilitator. But we were just so acutely aware that many, many members of our community are just not comfortable to jump onto an online environment, particularly our most vulnerable people. And that was really, really tough.
Yeah, it just sounds like you were so creative over that time, and there was the demand to be creative in order to continue providing the services that you knew the families that you work with needed.
We did have some really lovely feedback from a number of people. Often it was parents who were really busy in lockdown trying to homeschool, and they would try and organise just this 1 hour of quiet time just for themselves to link into these meditation and mindfulness groups. And one lady said, look, this is the one moment in my lockdown experience that actually gave me any sanity and any sense of connection with other mums who were also really struggling. And she was just incredibly grateful for that. We've also had a number of other people who have gone through more complex recoveries. And one lady explained that the learnings had helped her understand her journey after rehab and why it was so important that she keep her connection with community.
It just sounds like you've been doing some incredible work. How has it impacted on you and some of the other people working?
There's been lots of stages of grief and healing for all of us. We were all had lived experience. We're all personally impacted in various ways. The team's wellbeing and my wellbeing, it was definitely much lower immediately after the Black Summer, when we felt very helpless. We were being asked to provide and asked for this and that by community, but there was nothing coming forward from government to give us any sense of control or ownership or leadership in our local recovery experience. And that really impacted our wellbeing quite negatively. As we've become more in control of our own journey and able to work in that grassroots way with community, which is what we've always done, we've noticed our own wellbeing and the team's wellbeing becoming a lot more buoyant. You feel a lot more purposeful in your work, and there's this constant feeling of feeling extremely blessed to be able to work in these really creative ways.
I'm also wondering, do you do any specific things to look after yourself over this period to keep you going? Because, as you said, the demand was twofold. It was your own personal experience as well as supporting very vulnerable people.
There was a few things that happened that, when I reflect, were really instrumental. One of the things we did was invest in our leaders with training, and the other thing we did was invest in our whole team with wellbeing retreat. One of our agenda items in our team meeting, the first one after our acknowledgement to country, is our wellbeing check-in. How are you? How are we going? Are we okay? We're all in this together. There's a real sense of that in the community, but now we've all shared this collective experience of disaster, pandemic, disaster on the back of climate change, the housing crisis. It's very much a collective experience. We are definitely all in it together.
So you've started talking about some of the impacts on your community. Is there anything else you want to talk about around the impacts that you've noticed on the communities that you work with?
Absolutely. Initially, we noticed a very stiff upper lip approach from a lot of people in the recent months after the Black Summer. So it was really just, we need immediate needs, food, water, shelter, those sorts of things. But we're really seeing now a huge increase in self-harm, suicides, and severe persistent mental health disorders, and an increase in those sort of crisis, and particularly an increase on the back of COVID with the housing crisis as well. Our way of working has changed to match that. So we do more of an assertive outreach model now, where we're out at the rough sleeping sites many times a week, providing immediate assistance.
So you're really talking about the fundamental needs of people in terms of where you're intervening. You also mentioned that there are other NGOs that are working in this space.
Yeah, it's been a really great region, particularly the Eurobodalla. There's a lot of players that have been in their roles for a really long period of time, and there's been a lot of pre-existing partnerships, and those have just gone from strength to strength. So it was quite hard on the back of the bushfires to have a whole lot of out-of-area providers coming in to fix things with money that the existing providers never were even aware of. Previously, before the fires, there was no investment in this region at all, of any substance. One of the positives has been the opportunity to see what can be done when there is some investment.
What an opportunity for the community to keep building its capacity, and for your service to be instrumental in that must be a rewarding experience.
It has been a hugely rewarding experience, and there's so many answers that lie in the crossing of sectors that haven't previously worked together. So the success has really been around bringing in the arts and culture. There's been some absolutely fantastic programs like our youth theatre work in partnership with Campbell Page and a youth theatre company from Sydney. And we've also partnered with Bay Theatre Players around that, and Fling down in Bega. And we're really seeing through those programs a huge need in our young people that we didn't see as prevalently before the fires and COVID.
And it also sounds like you're doing it with very little extra funding.
We've had 4 buckets of funding through, but all of those buckets came through really late in the day. They came through 12 to 18 months, sometimes more, after the fires. So there was a really big deficit where we were really scrambling. So we've built these amazing programs, and we know that disaster recovery, it's a 3 to 5 year at least experience, but the government hasn't really looked at disaster with the pandemic overlaying that whole experience. I would really encourage government to actually look at more sustained funding in the areas that are still recovering. We've really got to just keep our eye on the actual recovery outcomes that we're working towards.
How could government have supported your work in a way that it would be most useful to the community at that time when you're saying that there wasn't any extra money? What would you have liked to see?
I think I would have liked to see from government a recognition of the existing service system and what we're already doing. An understanding of the players in the region, I think, is essential for any kind of disaster recovery regional plan, because you can build on those strengths that already exist. So my expectation would have been a direct approach to the providers in the areas, and I think also a bit of linking up of local providers with philanthropic providers. People donating were giving to the really large organisations, and the reality is quite often they don't have the links in the community. So I just think more value needs to be placed in place-based providers.
There's a lot to be dealing with: the administration, the governance, the management of the programs and the delivery of the programs.
Huge amount. And then overlaying that is our increasing complexity and staff responding to people in huge crisis very quickly. The funders don't seem to realise that there is a very valid management structure that must exist for an organisation to be robust and compliant. And that's okay, and it needs to be costed and appreciated and respected.
What advice would you give to other services who are trying to figure out how best to operate in this changed landscape of post-bushfires, post-floods, and the pandemic, which overlays all of that?
So I think the advice I'd have is making sure you've got really great relationships with other organisations, understanding what they do well, what you do well, understanding what the gaps are in your particular region. They're unique in every region. What works in one place won't work in another place necessarily. Really being willing to hear people's stories and capturing those themes and designing around those themes. Our key theme for recovery, it's been around connecting to culture. So we've been doing a lot of Indigenous language revitalisation work and cultural work and on-country work with our local traditional owner elders. We've done a lot of work in the creative space with the youth theatre and the drama, and connecting to community, just bringing community together and trying to build celebration in and memorialising spaces that previously held stories that were very hard or very painful. So that's sort of been our things that have worked really well.
Thank you so much for your time, Malindey. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you and listen to your learnings. Thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you.
We thank our podcast guests for their time and valuable insights. The New South Wales Council of Social Service Building Resilience for Emergency Responses podcast was made possible with funding from the New South Wales Government's Social Sector Transformation Fund. For more podcasts, case studies and disaster resilience tools for your service, visit the Building Resilience for Emergency Responses webpage on the NCOS website, www.ncos.org.au.